And we're starting with Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, I've gone on at length about this particular theme, on this particular prophecy, and especially concerning the future of South Africa and the governance that's basically going to be following the downfall of this whole electorate system. And in particularly that it's been spearheaded by this government of national unity, or as I call them, the grifters of national unity. So the real thing is that, of course, what I said there in that particular prophecy was the fact that the whole thing was a sham as far as what was actually supposed to be the Democratic Alliance heading into government with the smaller parties and that moonshot pact, as they called it. But then they decided to abandon that, as in the Democratic Alliance, just to go into bed with the ANC, then subsequently rig the election at that. So what you're seeing and culminating all of this is that prophecy where I spoke about Cyril Ramaphosa having to crack down on corruption. And you've seen by the latest developments that the Democratic Alliance, after having the Deputy Minister of the Department of Trade and Industry fired from his actual cabinet, they followed up by issuing an ultimatum saying that 48 hours you fire every corrupt minister that's within the ANC, which was of course not adhered to, and Cyril Ramaphosa did not buckle on that. So then they subsequently have now stated that they're going to now stop with any national dialogue, meaning that they're not going to be talking with the fellow government of national unity affiliates and chiefly the ANC when it comes to matters of diplomacy and following due steps and all that, and of course consultative measures. So now what they're going to do straight up is just going to show their judicial powers, and of course they execute their powers and privileges through the parliament and vote out anything that they disagree with, and they're just going to go straight into that. There won't be any sort of agreement put in place as to how things follow up. So what I'm saying there is that, as you can see, that the decision making and in this particular political system, the decisions are already made in advance and are just follow through when you get into parliament and then reaching a quorum, meaning that the 51% to pass over anything, in this instance is going to be quite hung, and it might be very unpredictable. So you're going to expect things like the South African rand start to yo-yo, meaning that it's going to start, the dollar to rand, as usual, people flocking to the dollars in terms of instability. So start seeing that whole rand to dollar exchange start going up, and of course the rand pound, rand euro, it's just going to be a little bit all over the place as far as the currency devaluation maybe in this weeks to come, especially with this government national unity looking seemingly over. So following all of this and what I stated there, staying on the Cyril Ramaphosa prophecy, is the fact that subsequent to this, we will see him start, of course, executing, because the ultimatum was the mere fact that he has to get rid of corruption, because the DA technically haven't stated on paper that they've walked out of the GNU, so they're still holding him to that, but they're going to do it via the measures as given to them and using their powers instead of the candid diplomacy and having that agreement beforehand. Because the way the government of national unity was formed was the fact that on that whole principle that Cyril Ramaphosa is supposed to deal with the ministers in the ANC, which to date he hasn't really done as yet, not as per se. But in fact, he seems like he's a bit conflicted between appeasing his own internal party measures, because they're also quite conflicted and they're quite divided. So if you also remember that I had a prophecy update where I spoke about the fact that he's got knives coming at him from all over, and Cyril pretty much stands alone. He's an isolated figure. And right now, he's basically, and I've even stated that with the guidance and the peace of God has given him, has actually now decided to pull the plug. And, right now he's pretty much counting his time, because subsequently we've seen that it's aligned with the cold weather that has happened. And of course, we are back to load shedding, and they've already stated that we are technically in load shedding stage 6 territory. And the latest report from Eskom has been that we are at a point where this whole system is basically much going to collapse and Eskom is going to go. That's what actually has been said. And I got this from one guy who used to be he's actually a power generation specialist. And his name is Des. He's on that whole, he's on the YouTube channel. I forgot the name of the channel now that I'm thinking about it. Oh yes, called Beyond Politics. So you check that out. And he is like I was saying, he's a power generation specialist. And he's been stating now that it's now looking like it's done with as far as Eskom is concerned. So his sentiment is now very negative. And usually he's quite, complimentary, especially when he's talking about Eskom and the work that the technicians are actually doing and just keeping the power online and everything and securing the grid. But now he himself has pretty much just said that he doesn't see the future for the actual Eskom entity is now looking very, very bleak. So that's where we are right now as far as South Africa. And this whole situation where Cyril Ramaphosa will have to fight crime in order just to keep the lights on. And that's where I'm going with this. And we're now in the midst of it, as you can see. And to follow this is that you're going to start seeing that, Jacob Zuma from the MK party is now challenging his whole expulsion into ANC. So while he's still in the MK party, he still wants to control the ANC. So all the knives are coming over Cyril Ramaphosa. And if you remember that I said that high profile arrest has to happen. So, which was, of course, Jacob Zuma. So you're going to see the SIU, or the State Investigative Unit, starting to dig in Nkandla as the home of the former president Jacob Zuma. And that will lead to his subsequent arrest. Following that, I do believe that because the MK have been saying for a while that they'll be the only party that's been very vocal about the fact that the elections were rigged. And they've even so much as said, as far as their spokesperson, which is Nhlamulo Ndlela, has been saying that the ANC's actual figure is around 25%, meaning that not even this 40% that they're sitting on is actually legit. So technically, if they are pretty much on a level peggings in actuality and in terms of polls and ratings with the DA, because the DA have said, well, according to the last result, that they were 22%, but if the actual figure is 25% for the ANC, then maybe it is actually stating and showing what I was given into that prophecy, that the DA technically were the biggest party heading into that election, and they just were supposed to go into governance with the other parties. Something that Neil de Beer, who has actually been stating that there was an agreement and people just reneged on it as far as the Moonshot Pact and that whole coalition that was supposed to head into governance. And he had subsequently has actually stated that he was receiving death threats. Of course, I sound like I'm repeating information, but we must just see that we're now in the heat and the midst of this. And we need to now start seeing that, hang on, with the MK party now starting to threaten that they're going to now expose this election fraud, that it's going to lead to something else down the line. And we're going to see that whole chaos break out that I said, where people are just going to be breaking out with, various protesting. But a chief of that is going to be aimed at this particular election. There is going to be some other instability, of course, heading against the racial lines, which I explained. But the other one, which is we have seen, of course, with the service delivery, so to speak. And even there was one that I had way earlier that I actually forgot to mention about. And we're seeing that in Walter Sisulu University, were the students starting to protest and burning ties and all that. So it's a culmination of a whole lot of things right here that we are now looking at, and is going to further destabilize South Africa as we move into this era. And the only thing that's going to now keep the peace is going to be the community leaders and the constituency leaders, meaning that there's going to be community representatives that are going to be race-based or community-based, right? So that's the direction that we're heading in right now. And actually, I have something else which I'm going to start delving into a little bit as far as my actual feelings on that. And mainly that, I've been saying to people as far as the race dynamics, and, really, I just don't, I don't know, I just don't feel like I get it that, of course, people feel safer being within and amongst their races, and that's just, I just find that pretty sad, personally. But, I don't have the whole luxury of just calling it the way I want to see it, as far as this maybe people are thinking I'm being overly optimistic in saying that, the country needs to be a utopia and all of this, and people need to be judging each other by the characters, and also more so their spiritual inclinations. However, the way God has given it to me is the way I need to call it, and that's the way it's just going to be functioning, that people are going to be within their communities for the most part, and then just functioning there, because they feel better off being within their certain race and their segments. And of course, we've already seen that this whole thing amped up about white genocide and all that, which I've spoken at length about, ad nauseum. And the main thing is that and people are just missing that, yes, these things happen, but notice that when it comes to acts of terrorism, and even if you say that, well, okay, fine, there's a terrorist group that's out there to kill all white people, it's always funded, and especially by somebody in the international community. So when they're creating some sort of hype around something else, it means that there is something in the pipeworks that's being firstly weaponized, and then, of course, when you start weaponizing, it means that you've pretty much put in some money and invested into getting people to bear arms and then carry out an order. It's like an assassination like any other hit. And that's unfortunately the state of the world, which is pretty sad. But the one thing I just want to lament, and I just want to say that, to people, that ultimately, as far as the unification of South Africa, it's going to start through the body of Christ. And of course, we serve a God who's actually impartial. And of course, human methods to try to be kumbaya and all this, and to be sort of trying to unify, have all been false, and unfortunately, that's just the way it is. And of course, the one thing that's going to be exemplary of that is this whole interfaith, one world religion thing, is that, the workings of the devil, who Jesus has said that is a divided kingdom, unfortunately still at play. And only once Babylon falls, and I'm talking, of course, the spiritual Babylon, I'm talking once the beast system has fallen away, and that's when God starts doing things anew. Maybe then we see, and maybe then do we move past this whole race thing? That's just me, it's just sad. I love South Africa and everything, and it actually deeply hurts me that we're going back to that whole racial stuff, because I lived 10 years under apartheid. I was, of course, makes me a baby then, or a child of this whole late side of apartheid, which we've had our inclinations and we were the social guinea pigs, as far as I am definitely that part of the generation where we are trying to be, getting people working together, and especially knowing each other. And from there, we had to work out all our differences. Just to go back to that is to me, is disheartening. But hey, as God has willed it, and remember, that's who I serve. That's the way it's going to be moving forward, and that's the way it has to be sorted out till something better comes along. Of course, which I've already stated about the fact that the future leaders within this current generation that is at school right now, and then are going to be really embodying that whole godly form of governance. Anyway, that's just the update for now. I'm going to get into the main thing. Thank you for listening out, and even my emotional sort of soliloquy over there. Thank you for that one, and I'll be back again.